So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Jenna.
Hi, I'm Jenna, and could you tell us about your life outside being an author?
Sure. I'm actually coming to you right now from my office in Winter Garden, Florida. Any of you who've ever been to Orlando, it's kind of just northwest of Orlando. And I still have a real job at a textbook publishing company, but I work at home on Tuesdays. So I try to do Skype events like this on Tuesdays. I've had that job for 26 years, but before that, I was a middle school language arts teacher in Florida. So a lot of Tangerine comes from that experience. And then before that, I grew up in New Jersey, and I played soccer from the time I was 8 years old right up into college in New York. So the soccer went into Tangerine too. I'd say those are the two big elements from my real life that went into the book.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Maddie, and I would like to know what inspired you to write the novel Tangerine.
Tangerine really began with my drive to work. I was driving past these beautiful citrus groves every day, and then gradually, one by one, they started to disappear and get plowed up and turned into housing developments. So I was looking for an idea for a young adult novel. I had written an adult novel that didn't go anywhere, so I was going to try a young adult. And I came up with this idea. They say, write what you know. I wanted to write about the people who were moving in to my area of Florida, but also the people who were getting pushed out. So I set the novel right where I live so I could research and talk to people about different topics in it.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Joel, and I was wondering why you chose Eric to be the antagonist of the novel.
Well, curiously, when I first started out, I don't know if you know the author Carolyn Cooney. She wrote The Face on the Milk Carton and a bunch of other really good young adult books. But I remember going to hear her speak, and she said, when you're writing for young adults, make your good guy good, make your bad guy bad, and make sure the bad guy gets it in the end. So I was thinking, okay, how can I make this really bad guy? And when I started out with Eric, Eric and Paul were actually twins, but that soon became ridiculous. You know, Paul would do something good, Eric would do something bad. So they started to separate my own mind. I gave Eric football, I gave Paul soccer, and one had a handicap, one did not. So Eric kind of grew from that idea that he had to be the bad guy, but he also had to have stuff going for him in life too. You can't just be purely bad. So that's kind of where he came from.
Thank you.
Yeah, am I on a screen, by the way?
You're on a big projection screen in an auditorium.
Okay. I to know if I do have a couple of props here if you'd like to see them, but I'll save it for after the questions.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Colin, and I wanted to know what experience did you have that led to the incorporation of the weather phenomenon in the book?
Well, that stuff's all true. I don't know how much time you spent in Florida, but it's not really fit for human habitation. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on. I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm used to having 4 seasons. But down here, it's really hot. You have to have air conditioning. We have hurricanes, we have sinkholes, we have, love bugs that clog the roads. So all of the weather stuff is true, including the fact that it's the lightning death capital of the world. So when Mike Costello gets zapped by lightning, that's not that uncommon down here. When a sinkhole opens up under Lake Windsor Middle School, that barely makes the news down here. These are just common things in Florida that are sort of foreign to other states. You know, when I travel to Kentucky or to California, people talk about Tangerine like it's a science fiction novel, like it's set on another planet. But in Florida, people look upon it as more realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I was wondering, what were you imagining Paul's grandfather whispered to Eric when he went into his room by himself?
Well, kind of going back to the idea of those of you who were writers, yeah, characters, even if they're bad, can't be all bad. And I imagine the grandfather was saying something like, you know, you have to own this, this is your fault, but it's not entirely your fault. You know, the grandfather's mad at the parents for not making Eric deal with what he did 10 years before, just kind of burying it and thinking it'll go away. So I imagine he said something encouraging to it, like, you know, you have to face the music on this and then life will go on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Zach, and I was wondering if the character was based off someone from, if the character Eric was based off someone from your past.
If Eric is based on someone in my own life?
Yes.
Fortunately, no. And I did have one sibling, sister, who was very nice, but I certainly have known Eric in my life. You know, I've met people who were, I would say Eric is a sociopath, which means someone who doesn't really have feelings like you and me. You know, he pretends he does, but he doesn't really. He's just kind of faking it, and it's not altogether his fault. That's how he's hardwired. He's just someone who is entirely out for himself, is manipulative, and the fact that he can kick a 50-yard field goal opens up all these doors for him. You know, he doesn't ask for all the adulation that's heaped on him, but he uses it when he gets it.
I was wondering why you chose to end the book the way you did, because I rewrote the ending to the book, and it's where Arthur and Eric get charged with murder. And my teacher was wondering if I could like send it to you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to see it. Yeah, I ended it there because to me it was all about, as a writer, you set out certain ideas in the beginning, and one of the ideas from the beginning is what happened to Paul's eyes, you know, and I felt, you know, I had answered that, and the focus, the story's told by Paul, so the focus is on him throughout. So yeah, I didn't want to go beyond that and move the focus to Eric and Arthur and what happens to them. Basically, you know, justice is going to catch up to them because justice catches up to everybody in the end. So I didn't feel I had to be, you know, that specific about it. I wanted to end with Paul in that car thinking about Luis and, you know, end it right there. That's also why I'm not interested in a sequel to it, because I felt this particular story got wrapped up nicely right there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Brooke. If you could have us learn one lesson from the novel Tangerine, what would that lesson be?
I would hope that in our violent society, what kids would learn is that Paul succeeds not through violence, but just by kind of standing his ground. Paul has a sense of himself, and he doesn't let himself get pushed around by his brother, the bully, but he also doesn't, resort to shooting him or anything extreme like that, or, he's a good person and he triumphs by that. So if you find yourself in a situation, and we all do, where you're getting bullied by someone, just stand up for yourself in a sensible way, not in a violent way. And in the long run, you will succeed. The thing that happens to people who are writing books is they're all pumped up about writing it, and it's a long haul, it's a marathon. So what I do, and this is advice I give when I'm helping people, is I write the climactic scene and I write the final scene. I work from an outline, so I know what's going to happen. But I write these big scenes almost from the very beginning. Then when I start beginning of the book and I'm kind of working my way through it, it can be like, trudging through the desert. You get tired sometimes, but you have these oases ahead of you. You think, oh wow, I've already written this great scene for the climax. All I have to do is get there. And then I have the final scene written after that. So one way to keep your motivation going as a writer, I think, is to do the outline and then to write these big scenes so you'll have them in place, something to shoot for as you move forward.
And also, I would like to ask, how long does it usually take you to write a book?
My stock answer is a year, but it can take a couple of years to get the outline and all my ideas together of what I really want to do. And then once I sit down and start, the first draft really only takes maybe 2 months. But then there's always a second draft, a third draft, where I go back and I'm expanding. Like I'll go back and I'll just put an X on a scene in brackets. And to me, that means expand this scene. And then that'll be my assignment to myself one day. So the whole process before I send it to a publisher takes about a year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Abby, and I was just wondering, since I want to be an author, what advice do you have for someone who wants to be an author?
I've stumbled upon a pretty good website. I don't know if you've ever heard of NaNoWriMo. Let me spell it for you. NaNiWriMo, and it's an acronym for National Novel Writing Month. So if you Google nanowrimo.org, you'll find this website, and then you click on a young authors button. And what they have you do is write one novel every year. And it's not supposed to be any good. You just get your topic, and then you commit to a certain number of words a day. Then you spend the month of November just cranking it out. And they send you a certificate at the end. So let's say you're 14 years old. By the time you're 21, you've written 7 novels. And none of them are that good, maybe, but they're better. They keep getting better every year. So I think that's a good tip. Join NaNoWriMo and then get a good idea and then crank out a novel every year, and you'll really learn from the process.
And then what other books have you written?
Have I written? After Tangerine, I wrote Crusader, which is a high school murder mystery. Then Story Time, which is kind of a crazy ghost story. London Calling is a time travel book back to World War II. Taken is kind of a time travel, but it goes into the future, the near future. Then I have an ebook called Memory Lane, and then my new one is called A Plague Year. It's set in Pennsylvania, and it's about the plague in the book. It's true, is a plague of methamphetamine that swept across small-town Pennsylvania. Those are my 7 novels so far, and I just sent an 8th one into publisher.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm Miss Keep. And I was wondering if you were to teach the novel Tangerine in the middle school classroom, what would be your main focus while teaching it?
Well, my wife teaches it every year. She teaches 7th, and it's actually a little bit too long to do. She usually runs out of time. But I would break it into the parts of the novel, plot, setting, characters, theme. And the way I look at the plot of Tangerine is it's really 3 books. The first third of it sets up all of Paul's problems and the weirdness of this town he's moved to. The second third is a sports story. It's the soccer season of Tangerine Middle School. And then the third part goes back to all the problems that were set up and tries to show how they can be resolved. Just one thing about the character of Paul I would emphasize is a character has to change in a novel. And Paul, literally grows out of his clothes in the novel Tangerine. And his mother has to take him to the mall at the end because nothing fits. He's like a different person at the end than he was at the beginning. Setting, a lot of people stress the setting in Tangerine just because it has such impact on the action. Lightning bolts come down from the sky, the earth opens up underneath you. So setting is a big factor. And then theme. Theme is tricky. I think it's hard for kids to understand because it's such an abstract concept. But to me, the theme of Tangerine is embodied in a speech that Louis Cruz makes when he's telling Paul how to make a tangerine, is that it starts with a rough lemon rootstock that has no value in the supermarket, but it's a very tough kind of fruit. And then you graft this more delicate type of fruit onto it, which is a tangerine. And in a way, that's what happens to Paul. He's this sort of delicate, rich white kid who moves into this sort of tough school. And is he going to live or is he going to die? And by him getting sort of merged with these kids on the soccer team, he learns a lot about himself. He becomes a stronger person and flourishes because of it. So I guess that's how I would approach it, those 4 things.
Yeah, when you talk about theme, a major theme that we did talk about in the classroom was the coming of age for Paul. Seeing who he really wanted to be in life, and all those influences that he was surrounded by throughout the novel, the negative influences and the positive influences, and then who he wanted to become because of those influences. So, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if you've studied FDR yet, in social studies maybe, but President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I'm a big reader about him, and he would have been just another rich playboy, except he was struck down by polio. And suddenly here's this guy who had everything in the world, and he finds himself one of the unlucky people who has been struck down with an affliction. He couldn't walk for the rest of his life. And that turned him from being just another rich white guy to being one of the greatest presidents. It gave him a connection to people who were unlucky, who had handicaps, who had disadvantages, and it made him a much better person. So I think that's what happens with Paul, too. Joey Costello can't go to Tangerine Middle School and get along with other kids. He looks down on them. But Paul does not. Paul has empathy for other people, and therefore he can be who he becomes.
Thank you so much for talking to our students today. I think
Sure. It's my pleasure. I was going to show them a few things I have here just to wrap it up.
I think Miss Henderson has a question for you as well.
Okay.
I was hoping that you could just speak to the students for just a moment about the importance of having good writing skills, especially when you get to the college and career level. If you could just speak to that for a minute or two.
Sure, because I am, professional writer. And beyond that, my day job is I edit language arts textbooks. So nobody needs better writing skills more than I do. Because if you put out a spelling book with one spelling error in it, it's a joke. It's a huge mistake. And people do kind of judge you by your writing skills. You know, if you send a resume with spelling errors on it, somebody's going to notice that. I'm going to say, why didn't this kid run spell check? Or if you write an email and you've been, sloppy about it, people are going to notice that. So it's a way to protect yourself, is to use this power that you have of language arts, of, knowing how to write, and not something fancy, just a simple sentence that shows you took care to get it right. Just like you wouldn't show up with ripped clothes on for an interview. You wouldn't show up with a sloppy resume for an interview, because both attest to your attention to detail. Do you care about getting the little stuff right? Because, people always want that in life, especially if they're going to be paying you to do something. They're going to want to know that you worry about details. And your writing is a way to assert that for yourself.
Thank you. And you can, if you wanted to go ahead and show them the props, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, just very quickly. I don't know how well you could see there. How's that? This is...
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. This is the original cover. I don't know if you've ever seen it, of Tangerine. Not a very popular cover. It's kind of weird looking. It's Paul in a grove of what look like oak trees with orange balls hanging from them. This is someone who's never seen an orange tree. But what's interesting about this cover is the title treatment. Those of you who are artists out there, what the artist did was write the title in white spray paint. Now, that wouldn't mean anything to a person just picking this book up cold, but once you've read it, it's kind of an inside joke, because white spray paint turns out to be very significant in the revelation of what happened to Paul. And then Tangerine came out in paperback. This is the first Scholastic paperback of it. This is actually the second version of cover. When they sent me the first one, my daughter, who was a teenager at the time, said, "I don't care if this book is by you, I'm not carrying around a picture of an ugly nerd." So I called Scholastic and I said, "You want to hear what your teenage girl fan said about this?" And they actually made Paul better looking on this cover. And they added lightning bolts in the reflection of his glasses. This is the very rare Korean version of Tangerine. Tangerine's available in Korean, French, and Italian. Curiously, it's not available in Spanish. I don't know why. I mean, it has Spanish in it. And if you ever hear the audiobook, it's really excellent, and it's read by a guy who's obviously bilingual. And then finally, this is probably the version you read, and I had some input into this one. Again, if any of you are graphic artists, it repeats a shape at the top, kind of the round shape of the soccer ball and Paul's head and the eclipse of the sun. And then it shows his world burning behind him, the muck fire, which actually happens underground, but they put it on top for a visual. Those are a few Tangerine things I had in my office. Thank you for inviting me to your school today. You've certainly been a very attentive audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And from me and Ms. Henderson and all of our 7th graders here, thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to us about the novel Tangerine that our kids love so much.
I'm still a 7th grader in my heart. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much.
Teachers, parents, and students love the Kenton County School District.